Ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest feeling that comes out of playing a game of chess? Is it chess.com telling you got a brilliant move or a 98% accuracy? Maybe you beat one of your colleagues or coworkers in real life, somebody you really despise, and now you feel intellectually dominant. Well, for Magnus Carlsen, greatest chess player of the last 10 years and potentially of all time, it might be difficult to find this same emotion. But in today's video, I will share with you a game that he played on chess.com that broke their game review, broke Stockfish, and gave the highest estimated ELO I have ever seen in my life. He played such a game of creative brilliance, and he did it with just 3 minutes on the clock. So without further ado, I would like to show you the Magnus Carlsen online immortal game. His opponent for this game was Chess Panda 123. That is not a panda that learned how to play chess. Although I can imagine like it's going to become a whole thing, like animals playing chess. I've been thinking of recording footage with my dog playing chess. Chess Panda 123 is none other than Yu Yangyi, who is the second highest rated player in all of China, which is a really big accomplishment because their number one is the world champion. So listen, being number two, that's like Scottie Pippen on Michael Jordan's Bulls. Magnus had the white pieces, and Magnus opened the game with e4, which in and of itself should get him the estimated elo. So how did Magnus Carlsen play like a 4,000 rated player, essentially? Well, his opponent played the move e5. It is very much the toolbox of the Chinese players to play the Petrov defense. In fact, the Petrov mirror image counterattack in the center of the pawn is probably played most exclusively by the Chinese players and Fabiano Caruana, and more recently, Yan Nepomniachtchi. So those are kind of the big names. Yu Yangyi has been a massive proponent of the Petrov. Ding Liren certainly knows how to play it, although he prefers to go for the Spanishes. And the idea is after knight takes e5, black kicks out the knight, and then black takes back on e4. If you're feeling edgy, you can play the Stafford Gambit. Yu Yangyi was not feeling edgy. He played the move pawn to d6, kicked out Magnus's knight, knight e4, and now there's no less than a million options. In fact, even in this position, there are multiple options. White can play knight d3, knight c4, but he just, Magnus plays the main line. And now here there are two major branches and then many branches after that. White can play what's called the classical variation, doing this and then developing and castling queenside, looking for some attack. Magnus plays this in a principled way, puts his other pawn in the center, and black here commits yet another pawn move, which is pawn to d5, because he needs to control the center, and he also needs to open up the bishop. Now, the funny thing about this position is that the Petrov defense essentially looks like it could be this, like knight f3, knight f6, and now black gets an extra move, and that extra move is playing knight to e4. That's essentially what it looks like. Now, that's not a great move. Like, if it's black's move here, black should develop one of the bishops and castle. So it's very interesting that the extra tempo is spent moving the knight into the center because that knight is going to be a target. Like, that knight, it theoretically does not really benefit black moving it a second time. Now again, here there are many options. Bishop to d6, and more recently, black is putting the knight out, putting pressure on the center, and potentially jumping here to get the bishop. But black now cannot play pawn to c6. Magnus castles, we have bishop e7. This position has been seen thousands and thousands of times, and now we have c4 trying to undermine that pawn, which would undermine that knight. And normally black has a pawn there, so since black moved his knight here and now cannot move that pawn there, it would look like it's an inaccurate setup, if not for the next move, which is knight to b4. You are justifying putting your knight on c6 to play knight to b4 and attack Magnus's bishop on d3. Magnus moves the bishop out of the way. This is still pressured. And now if you try to do this, you should have done that a long time ago, because now the knight is going to get booted to the outskirts of the board. So that's not the plan. Black castles. And here, white can choose between one branch of moves and a second. The second branch of moves is much more popular. It's to go knight c3, at which point black develops the bishop. And then in many lines, white can play like cd5, and then black will like take here, and then get out with the knight. And I suppose you do not want to allow the move knight to c2, so Maybe you after bishop f5, you actually play a3 first. And then the knight backs out, and we get to this position. You also don't even have to take. You can play the move rook to e1. So that's what normally happens. In this game, Magnus changes the move order. He plays that first, then he takes, and now we have this position where black can play the move bishop f5, just like I just showed you. But Yu Yangyi plays knight a5. Knight a5 prevents the move pawn to c4, which is a very logical move because white would want to take as much central space as possible. Magnus now plays rook to e1, which is always a good move, lining up the rook. And now we have bishop to f5. Okay, here's the problem with the move bishop to f5 in this particular move order, and why probably Yu Yangyi should have played something like bishop to d6. Rook e1 re-enables the move c4. What? How? Well, it's a deep idea. The point is that if you go c4, it's just take, take, take. But if there was a rook here, the rook would take the bishop. So the idea of moving the rook to e1 actually sets up the move c4, which is why it would have been good for black to play bishop d6. Yu Yangyi, however, just develops his bishop. He spends like 8 seconds, plays bishop f5, but now this gives Magnus this pawn to c4 move. And Yu Yangyi goes back to d8. But, of course, it's not so simple. I mean, white's pawns are still very much under fire. Now Magnus thinks for a little bit. He could play a handful of options here. He can offer a trade of light-scored bishops, which definitely looks like it improves his position. He can maybe try to rotate the rook. Instead, he plays bishop to d2 after some thought, which, in case you are not paying attention, is a very, very clear attack on the knight on a5. You can defend a piece 2 different ways. Well, 3 different ways. The third way is just creating a threat of equal or exceeding nature, danger levels. You can defend this by playing pawn to b6, but that would be a really bad move. Because even though you've defended the knight, as you get better at chess, you learn mini lessons, such as 3 for 3 is not always 3. Like in math, it's very simple, okay? 3, 3, 3. Not here. That's 3 points. That's 3 points back. But the damage that you've done to your structure is irreversible, and you will lose all those pawns. So, you know, I'm going to write that down as an idea for a YouTube short later. I'm going to write 3 does not equal 3. There you go. c5. That's another way of defending, and if bishop takes a5, there is not going to be a damage to the structure. Magnus plays d5, and now has a very solid formation in the center. Yu Yangyi attacks the rook in the corner of the board, and we have rook a2. So far, Magnus has not done anything from a generationally creative standpoint. I mean, they're just playing relatively natural moves. But Magnus has good pressure on that knight on a5, which, by the way, really cannot return home. That knight is sort of a goner. He has a connected and protected pass pawn, but Yu Yangyi has some very menacing situation going on here, and he plays rook e8. He plays rook e8, making it quite difficult for white to move. But here, Magnus begins his genius. So I'm going to turn off the evaluation bar, as I sometimes like to do when I don't want you to be distracted with what Stockfish has to say about the game, and I just want to show you the genius of the idea. So Magnus plays bishop f1. Spends 8 seconds on that move. Bishop f1 is inviting an exchange of rooks. And Yu Yangyi captures. Now, white can take 3 different ways. Taking with the knight, according to the Stockfish, according to Stockfish, is the worst. It's the worst way. Taking with the bishop or the queen is fine. If queen takes c1 is played, you have an attack on the knight. However, the queen no longer covers the b3 square, so the knight would gallop in and be safe. I don't think Magnus liked that. If you take with the bishop, you're not doing anything to the position. Also, there is an incredible move, knight c6, and you cannot take, and the knight would once again get into white's position. So, seeing as though neither of those moves did anything substantial, and therefore potentially could even cause the knight to escape, Magnus decided to take with the knight. Now, I'll turn back on the eval. The computer doesn't like that move. Why does the computer not like the move knight takes e1? Because, as it turns out, there is another idea lurking here, and it's actually the move Yu Yangyi finds, which is pawn to b5. Pawn to b5 is a very nasty move, because it now attacks the pawn on c4, threatening for the knight to escape again, and if you take, the pawn on d5 falls. And you don't want the pawn on d5 to fall, because the rook is trapped, or you're just going to lose all your pieces. Suddenly, black's pieces all come alive. So, Magnus's position is under severe existential threat. So he thinks for 40 seconds, and he comes up with an idea that even Stockfish isn't able to appreciate unless you let it run for a little while. Magnus, in this position, plays the move Queen F3. First glance, the computer is utterly unimpressed. You know why? Because the computer finds one idea here, and it's a very simple idea. Queen F3 attacks the bishop and potentially wants to fight on that diagonal, and it is the justification of the bad move, knight takes E1. But this shows you Magnus's genius. He plays Queen F3. But now, the queen, which hits the bishop, no longer protects B1, and the rook is trapped. Magnus accidentally got his rook trapped on the edge of the board. Or has he? Well, it turns out Magnus had an idea. What was going to be the follow-up of this move when the bishop waddled into the position and took the rook in the corner? Because this bishop covers the escape squares. It was to play D6. And now the knight is hit, the rook is hit, and the black queen is overloaded. Okay, well, I can just play knight takes C4, right? No, because after I take, bishop A5, the queen has to stay guarding the rook, and my rook is able to escape for a moment. Furthermore, I have a pawn. I can use my pawn to deflect the queen from the defense of the rook that my queen on F3 is hitting. Oh, this is some nasty stuff. Pawn to D6 is a ridiculous defensive resource. So Yu Yangyi plays rook B8. Now the queen no longer has to guard the rook because the queen no longer hits the rook and the knight can leave. Well, Magnus finds bishop A5 and just in time escapes with his rook. Just in time manages to escape. Now this still looks like bogus. His bishop is blocked and his knight is on the back rank. And not to mention, Yu Yangyi is going to have a pass pawn of his own. He plays D7. The idea of D7 is rook E8 check. Okay, simple enough, rook F8. Now you cannot play the move rook to E8 because that doesn't even do anything. You're not, all right, so what? You're not queening. There's nothing you can do. So Yu Yangyi plays pawn to C3. He is now 2 squares away from queening himself. Pawn to C3. Magnus here, cool, calm, and collected, brings the queen forward. I still don't see the threat. What is the threat? You can't queen, and you also could not play rook takes and infiltrate on the back rank because I would just block. So, what's the idea of queen D5? Yu Yangyi plays bishop back to G6. He is now just 2 squares away from queening. This is why it's very important to have no evaluation bar, because it would spoil the fun. In this position, Magnus plays queen to D6. And Yu Yangyi resigns. He resigns because checkmate is unstoppable. Queen hits the rook. If you take, I queen. If you try to escape, I take and I mate you. Your own bishops suffocated the king. The king's house was on fire. He was trying to break out. The bishops, standing guard in front of the windows, accidentally held them shut. How did that happen? How did all that happen? And then I will do the big reveal of his elo being 3850. Well, first of all, the idea of taking back with the knight and queen F3 was not fully appreciated by Stockfish. Pawn to D6 was a genius counterattack. It only failed, of course, to Stockfish, who knows everything. Stockfish is like the kid in the class with the test bank. In this position, to get out of this, what black has to do is sack the knight for free, then attack the queen, make it move. After bishop A2, bishop A5, black needs to counterattack the queen. Bishop D8, rook A7, take, C4. There was like a 7-move sequence for Yu Yangyi to find to refute Magnus's idea. If he refuted Magnus's idea, maybe he would have been, he would have been the 3850 in this game. But Magnus finds a sensational counterattacking measure here. And then after Yu Yang plays rook b8, he's just immediately worse. And here, he needed to stop the move pawn to d7. It's like in basketball or football. Stop the ball. So queen d8, because rook d8 doesn't stop anything. And the other reason that Yu Yang lost so quickly is because his rook got sandwiched. So his rook got sandwiched near the king, and Magnus just went like this. Now, what if Yu Yang had played something like queen c7? You know what Magnus would have played? He would have went queen a8. Look how disgusting that move is. And then he would have done this. He would have just bulldozed the rook, bullied the rook, trying to get it to take to get him to promote. Instead, rook e8, queen d5, queen d6. And my friends, Magnus Carlsen's game review was something so heinous. I've never seen something like this. This man, Magnus Carlsen, played this game at a 3850 estimated elo. This man outperformed Stockfish in this game, according to chess.com's game review. Stockfish is 3,700. I've never seen that before. Now, if you actually go back through his moves, game review runs on a low depth, so it doesn't even fully anticipate like the counterattacking measures. But it still gave him a couple of inaccuracies, and even with 2 inaccurate moves relative to his opponent's elo, Magnus performed this game at 3850. The backwards knight move, disallowing the black knight from escaping. Queen f3, inviting bishop to b1. Pawn to d6, counterattacking the knight, which is supposed to be defended by the queen, which cannot fully defend because it's also guarding the rook. So a very natural move by Yu Yang to move allowed this and the escape, followed by the promotion, the threat of the promotion rather, followed by queen d5, and the suffocation of the black king. And his accuracy was 97.5. Yep. Guy's tough to beat. 3850 estimated elo, according to chess.com's game review. What more can I say? Now get out of here.